Hard. It's weird. Yeah, it's really weird. But you got Gritty in the background to keep you company just in case.
That's he is my wingman.
Well, Shane, thank you for joining me on the Long Game podcast, and excited to have you on board.
Thank you for inviting me.
So why don't you, just to kick things off, I know we've got a few things that we want to jump into, but who is Shane? Talk about your background and your experience.
Sure. So I am a 7-time funded technical entrepreneur. I've been the platform architect for companies like Viacom. I've run product and technology for cable channels. I've been the founding CTO for numerous startups that have gone through acquisitions. And at this point, I am someone who really enjoys building things I believe can be profoundly impactful. And that means to me that I am personally driven to build it, not simply by money, but because it helps me feel good about what I do.
That's I think that's potentially even underselling your experience and your abilities, but thank you for that introduction there. So you touched on just in terms of you like to build things that are impactful, and we were talking about the threshold for behavioral change. I want to just dive right into that. What is TBC, the threshold for behavior change, and how do you use it and think about it when building software products?
So oftentimes we talk about product market fit. We talk about the minimum viable product, and viability is often determined to be what will someone pay, or what will someone do, what will someone use, what is it that's that minimum viability. And while lots of people build the same mousetrap and hopefully get that second person in, for someone to change their behavior, if you're looking at a universe where people have already decided on something that they're using, they already have a tool, they already have a partner to change their behaviors, whether it's what they purchase, it's what they use, it's what they supply to other people, the threshold is higher because you have, very much like physics, you have that static inertia. You need to actually move them off the spot. And so oftentimes the viability of a product is not simply, can it compete? It must be demonstrably better enough by the definition of the person using it so that they see the value proposition and say, that's what it's worth me to make that change because it gives me what I want. So that affects different roles in the product universe differently. Person
And
who is
just to
buying,
summarize that real quick. So basically what you're talking about is in order to get someone to change behavior, the pain of staying the same has to be greater than the pain of change because there's always that barrier to change. And so it's how does that affect the different users in the product buying lifecycle?
true. And I think that, there's the old adage of, are you selling a vitamin? Are you selling a medicine? Or are you selling a cure? Uh, the idea here is that for someone to continue to use a product, if that product is solving 80% of their problems and you build an equivalent product that is now also going to solve 80% of their problems, but it's the devil they don't know. So now, even though you're an equivalent product and maybe even you're trying to sell it a little bit cheaper, the value proposition isn't one-to-one. Nothing is really commoditized because actually where you stand, what you have now is always going to be more comfortable and easier to adjust to than something new. So even commoditized products have a cost or a threshold for behavioral change. And that means that you have to decide you want to do something differently this time.
That makes sense. So talk me through the different roles when it comes to product and getting this change as it relates to companies, enterprises, startups.
Sure. So myself and another product nerd, John Vian, who has been integral with this. We've been working on these concepts since I think 2012. We came up with this discipline of product operations, really kind of distilling out what were the reasons, what were the roles, what were the perspectives that people had when they were deciding what product to use. I'm not talking about personas. I think inside of each of these roles, there are multiple personas, but this is, I often use the grocery store metaphor. The person who's shopping and buying is not the person who eats it. They're not the person who repairs it. Those are different roles. Those are different perspectives. It could actually be the same person, but they have different considerations at that time. The person who's buying it is trying to empathize with the person who's going to prepare it, and maybe empathize with the person who's going to eat it. But in that moment, they're constrained to what their universe is. What's the cost? What are the options in front of them? That we consider to be, that's the purchaser. The person who eats it, we call that the consumer. Consumer of the product is the person who actually enjoys the thing that you've just prepared and spent money on. The consumer in this role, they may or may not share the sensibilities of the person who bought it. Even if it's the same person, when you buy something at the store, how often does that thing sit in your refrigerator and eventually go rotten? You thought you would eat it. You really believed that the person who is eating it which is yourself, was going to want that thing, and it doesn't happen. So there's a logical disconnect between these roles, and there is not a perfect way of fitting it. So one of the challenges that we found is also that the person who actually makes the food, meaning yourself, you're actually facilitating, you're actually driving this value of what you purchased for what you ate. And that's a facilitator role. It's actually taking the thing, how easy it is to prepare. When you buy something, you find out that it takes an hour to make this dinner. Now you know that you're never going to actually bother. Even if it was cheap and you would actually enjoy eating it, if it takes too long, now you know. So all of these different roles, and there's a couple more, but all these different roles have different personas. Sometimes a person doesn't mind spending an hour cooking, being feel very, very good about it. Other times, a different persona would have a different set of value proposition. What we try to do is we try to take the individual product market fit and focus on these different roles, because each one is fitting a different set of parameters. You can't solve the overall product by focusing on just the guy who buys. Because if the person who buys it, if they're buying apples and the apples are rotting in the dish, they're going to stop buying it no matter how cheap you make it. So you've got to think about the person who's going to eat it. You've got to first think about the person who's going to prepare it. And in doing so, in changing these roles and embracing these personas, what you're capable of doing is realizing that the threshold for behavioral change. If to make mac and cheese, you have the same mac and cheese process you've ever done, you put a little milk. So you cook the noodles, it's mac and cheese. Someone else's mac and cheese, it can't take longer than the Blue Box Craft. It's going to have to be that if you're doing something else, if now the person who's making it feels better about making it because it's better for you, or the person who's buying it feels better because it's less expensive. The idea is that there's an aggregate sort of almost a utilitarianism here, that across these things, you've got to figure out a way to focus on one of these perspectives. You're probably not going to beat the enjoyment of Kraft mac and cheese easily. You're going to have to find one of the other methods. You're either going to have to sell it cheaper, or you're going to have to make it easier to use. And so the idea is that understanding where the opportunities are allows you to upset that particular area of the market. You can now focus on, this is where, when you make your little SWOT grid, and I'm sure everyone understands what that little quadrants are of who's your competitor and what they're doing. The reality is that if you're trying to look at the product only from a purchaser's perspective, you're going to miss the real opportunities. You're going to miss the opportunity to make the better product, or the product that is easier to use, or the product that actually solves different problems. And that's why breaking it down into these pieces allows you to have a very clear picture of what it is you're solving and for whom. Hopefully that is not horribly bereft of reason there.
No, I remember when you first told me about this concept, and I probably spent the next full week just ruminating on it and kind of digesting it. So to break it down a little bit more, define role versus persona. And then also, if you could talk through the different roles and then what that role looks like in the grocery store analogy, and then also in a selling or a software sales approach.
Sure. So the different roles are your consumer, there's the purchaser, there's the facilitator, there's the producer of the product, and then there's the financier. Financier is the person who actually funds this thing until it can kind of become self-fulfilling. Believe it or not, it actually matters that you give them a separate and distinct role, because there's going to be times when they need to be managed or uh, sated. They need to feel like their needs are being driven. So taking time from making the product to make the necessary financial documents that help them do what they need to do. It's a simple but kind of as a reference, think of the financier as its own little universe. Now, each of these roles, you have the consumer, you have the producer, you have the purchaser, you have all these different roles. If you think of that as what they're doing to your product, gets easier. Their role is to eat the food. Their role is to buy. Their role is to prepare their role is in reality, their role is just to actually provide that food to the grocery store. And that sounds crazy, but you have to consider that if you're trying to sell something and you are somehow not doing your best, if you as a grocery store aren't actually handling the apples, the farmer themselves going to stop giving them to you because they're going rotten and his name is getting drug around the mud. There's a lot of details here, but inside of the consumer, inside of the person who's eating this food, you may have a 5-year-old, you may have a kid in college, you may have someone who just wants something quick and easy to eat at the end of a long day. While they are in fact all in the same role as consuming it, they're coming out with very different that value propositions. Each one of them wants it for different reasons. And so
Different personas.
understanding that the person who's had a long day, the actual product that they're eating just has to be sufficiently not damaging, but the preparation is where they're focusing. They're trying to empathize with the person who actually creates the product, the person who actually facilitates eating this thing. That's their role. Their role is that while they are in fact eating it, they are actually empathizing with all these other pieces. It's much easier. They feel better about eating it because they knew it only took 5 minutes. So in this situation with all these different silos and all these different kind of concerns, you have different people in them and they have different weights of how important each of these things is. You know, a toddler might also be concerned about how long it takes, but they probably don't have the comprehension to understand that one costs more than another, especially if you make them into little dinosaurs, because that's the one I want. So recognizing that the different roles and the different people in these roles are going to have different weights to these value propositions helps you design a product, or at least design a roadmap that allows your product to be appealing to the right people that you've identified in the right way. Instead of creating a persona that feels kind of vague and doesn't really address the fact that they have these different, sometimes contrary roles, that the person who buys the apples certainly didn't want to waste the money, but the person who didn't feel like eating them because it just wasn't into apples, they're the same person. That's a thing that you have to, as the Apple person, you have to wrestle with. You have to make it easier. And that's when they started making those oranges smaller and super easy to eat, because now it was less time to work on. And that was really a brilliant way of the citrus growers figuring this exact problem out. And I found that to be. So inside of each of these silos, you have these different personas inside of their role. And that helps you build the backlog. It actually helps you score this backlog. And so what we had done, at least we scoped out for it, and we had used it in a couple of different tests. We built the ability to score, or at least prioritize, backlog tickets, your Fibonacci stuff, but we did it from each perspective. How important is this particular thing to a financier? How important is this particular thing to the person who's buying it? How important is this particular thing to the person who's eating it? Because moment to moment, day to day, suddenly you're like, wait a minute, the kids love to eat it, but parents aren't buying it. We need to focus on the purchaser. How do we fit their market? Okay, in reality, if you've already had these scores, we simply apply a little bit of bump to those scores, just mathematically, those things will get prioritized and be able to actually adjust and hit those marks. By operationalizing this aspect, you allow your product research people to do what they need to do. They need to really empathize. They need to go into that id perspective and really feel what the value proposition is for those roles. And they can be as as myopic as they need to be as accurate as possible to that particular perspective without trying to remember, oh yes, but I have to put that behind what the financier needs because I was told. In the situation, they do what they need to do. They prioritize it as they should, and the information and the product will then march forward with that much finer grain control of the backlog.
Yeah, I mean it's a fascinating framework. How important would it be for someone who's just starting out with a startup? Maybe they're a serial entrepreneur, maybe it's the very first one, to adopt these concepts early on. Do you think it's critical, or do you think it's a lot of overhead? How important is it for a startup to kind of adapt to these prioritization?
That's a great question. So where I land on this, and it's something that I've applied to my own groups, is just having the awareness of what's going on allows you to just be cognizant as you're writing these tickets. You can be notating it or tagging it without actually making all those scores like this. Just be notating it that this is mostly focused on the buying aspect versus the eating aspect or whatever it is. When we talk about computer software in the situation, the person who purchases a bit of software, usually an IT manager, is rarely going to be the person who's using it. Usually it's the accounting group or something else. And so the decision makers and the people who have the discretion and their and have those budgets, those are the ones who are thinking from a purchaser's perspective almost purely. It's really much more interesting when you get out of the metaphor of a grocery store, get into the actual nuts and bolts of my job is procurement. I need to go buy X seats of Y product for Z reasons. I'm not interested in what people feel about other than I was told these are my requirements. And so understanding that that perspective is valid, that perspective does actually drive a good resource for the software person who's actually making the software. But let's go towards, say, Slack. Slack didn't try to aim at the enterprise sale first. They aimed at the actual usability of a messaging system to average people and then had that drive upwards as an actual force into the market. That kind of thinking, being aware that if I try to take this product and I have to go build something that's going to make a CIO or CISO happy, your timeline and your cost and your time to market, it's aggressively hard if you actually figure out that there's a different way to actually get your numbers by going after a different perspective in this flow. Being able to adjust your standard product map and going after that particular value first gives someone like a Slack or an upstart, any upstart company, the ability to jump in and have an impact early. So do I think they need to do the whole universe? No. But if they're aware of it, it gives them the freedom and flexibility to attack a particular silo first.
So does this look like I am a new startup and I have my hypothesis of I'm building this software and it's going to change people's lives for X, Y, and Z. That's obviously the dream. When I have that hypothesis and that idea, and I identify that it's software and I need to build software, using this framework, do I use it to identify which roles I'm trying to create the most value for or the change for, and then identify a specific persona and then modify what their expected outcome is using my product versus something else? Or is it broader than that and I'm identifying multiple roles and I'm trying to see who I resonate the most with and kind of doing a product market fit feeling? How does this directly, tactically engage my decision making, my prioritization when building my new startup?
So that's sort of boils down into the operations aspect of this. The simplest way of describing this would be that understanding each of these roles and doing your rough back of napkin, not actually groomed, but just rough estimations around the complexity of these things allows you as a decision maker to look at where the low hanging fruit may be to get to that threshold for behavioral change. And this is where it all kind of wraps around again. If I can change the behavior of the actual consumer of a product like Slack, that might be a shorter path to at least getting some traction, improving some viability, than spending a lot of time on single sign-on integrations with large products. Whereas if I'm looking at the purchaser of the enterprise product, that's what they're going to be concerned with first. So understanding where the low-hanging fruit is, understanding what this role is in this overall universe, and understanding that you can adjust to that role with all of these different personas and actually build something that has that reaches that threshold for behavioral change. That drives, usually a behavioral change of anyone drives others to consider their own behavioral change. So once you get that motion, once you have something changing, gets easier. Each other perspective gets much easier to manage. If you suddenly have consumers using the product, you go back to your financier and you say, hey, we've got adoption. When you go back to the purchaser and you say, hey, your people are using this product right now, and you can give them history instead of them losing their data after 3 months, you can have the history. And oh, by the way, as the administrator, you can search this history, you can do those things, you can index it, you can solve this problem. Now, instead of coming in and saying, we think we can replace Microsoft messaging, it's like, no, your guys are already using it. Would you like to make the product they're using better? That's a different conversation. And the perspective now of that persona inside of that is not, I need to change them from one product that they're paying for another, is that I need to tell them that they can make an existing product that that their people are using better for them and for everyone. So now you've changed the calculus for the purchaser, which is really profound. And that's what all doing these, finding the threshold for behavioral change in each of these different perspectives allows you to do that. So that's again, the inside of those, the persona is going to drive things like, obviously for a Fortune 50 company, the time to actually purchase is going to be different than, say, a small company that's going to have 10 users. You know, the flexibility is different, and that you're going to have to adjust to, usually with the facilitators in this situation is software, the people who actually are the account representatives who are helping people get onboarded and helping people, the admins, figure out how to make it work with their single sign-on solutions. So understanding that overall, you're driving a change of behavior. You're driving people to want to and decide to use your product today. And that's going to be much easier long-term to convince the next silo, the next silo, and the next silo. It is, if done correctly, you pick the weakest perspective to attack, you knock that one down, and you go for the next one. And the idea is that iteratively over time, what you'll find is that breaking through and getting that behavioral change each time is something that opens up windows among everyone else.
If I were to start a new startup and apply this framework,
Yes.
I would have my hypothesis of this is broken. I'm building a new feature, new service that's addressing this problem. Then you identify the 5 personas, the 5 roles, right? The different roles that surround this ecosystem, and they might be the same people, but the different roles. I identify what those different types of personas could be within that. To the purchaser, who is maybe the millennial, maybe it's the person that's a corporate enterprise, right? Multiple different personas. And then when you are thinking about what to build, what your go-to-market is, what your MVP is, where you're prioritizing your precious resources on what we're going to build next, you think about it from a lowest hanging fruit perspective, because the objective of this threshold for behavioral change philosophy and framework is that find the person or the persona and role that you can flip first, that you can convince my way is better. My software is better. Use this. Stop doing what you're doing. This is better than what you're doing. And it's going to be a little bit of effort to change. No one likes change. It's painful. It sucks. But once you're on the other side, it's going to be better. And so once you flip that first person, you keep stacking the lowest hanging fruit using this framework, but you have your champion who has already started the change for that organization. And then you want to continue to reinforce that behavioral change with that individual, but then also with broader sales, the entire organization, the financier, the buyer, the other decision makers in the framework.
Absolutely. And that's a really good description. To invert it for today's market, right now, the person to appeal to the most is the consumer and the financier. So right now, if you're talking AI, those are the only two people who matter. Because they're not trying to monetize it yet. And the actual facilitation of when it happens and the people who are actually making the different language models are almost inconsequential. Which LLM are you using? Most people don't know. They can't tell you which one. They don't care because they're getting the value, at least in their mind. So you have the consumers who are using it and trying it and giggling and laughing. And then you have the financiers who are looking at your particular plan and saying, this has the greatest opportunity to succeed. So if you spend a lot of time trying to build a pricing model and a lot of resources trying to build a rate limiting system that would allow you to instantly monetize your LLM rates today, that product would probably be the least valuable one you could build. And it's not the least valuable one as far as if you're looking at EBITDA, like, that's a real product. It's a real thing. You're going to need that to make money eventually. Certainly that has value. But today you've got to focus on two people, the person who's using it and the person who's going to fund you. Everybody else is sort of, they're there and they're important, but they're not demanding attention today for this particular product scope. If you're building something that's a little bit more SaaS, like I said earlier, the Slack model going after the individual users is great, but many companies these days, because of their concerns with privacy and security, are telling their people not to use external product. So the old way of doing things may not be available, depending on if you're going after enterprise products, which are going to have those limitations. But if you go after a small startup group that has less available cash, but more opportunity for them to actually use the product without having to be worried about this compliance layer, you can focus on the right persona inside of the right silo. And that allows you to pick your market, figure out your adjustable market, figure out your serviceable market, figure out exactly what you're going to be building today, and get that funnel going as quickly as you can. The idea here is that every single one of these groups, you've got to have behavioral change. You've got to be turning these people into actual consumers. You have to turn them into customers. The consumers is a customer, the purchaser is a customer, the producer is a customer. All these people are your customer, and you've got to treat them.
In this current economic environment, what should new entrepreneurs be focused on? Is it AI? Is it lean, mean, profit machine? Where do you think that the biggest opportunity is, whether AI or otherwise? Maybe AI is too saturated for budding entrepreneurs to sink their teeth in and start solving problems.
I think one of the challenges that AI has exposed is it's a better tool. And by this, what I mean is that in the vaguest sense, if you had monks scribing out books and then suddenly you had a printing press, you didn't need fewer people writing. The tool just got better, which allowed more things to come through. The ability for any company to differentiate themselves is not going to be because everyone suddenly has a better tool, because everyone has a better tool. Everyone is using this AI. Everyone's using an LLM. Everyone's going to have these products. You're going to have to differentiate yourself as being better at using the product. So now, using that same method, you begin to focus on the different groups. If I'm going after my decision makers in large corporations, I'm going to focus on compliance. I'm going to focus on privacy. I'm going to focus on the things that, as we've seen, Samsung waved a flag and said, no one's allowed to put our stuff in there anymore because people are pulling information out. Even Microsoft's own AI was generating fake but valid Windows licenses, because that's what happens. So if you're going to focus on it, maybe it's not to focus on the LLM itself. It's going to focus on a rough interface, an interface between their product and that would actually do, I don't know, weed out any of the PII, do some kind of obfuscation, tokenize this information. There's a universe of people out there doing privacy vaults or data vaults that are attempting to do this for HIPAA compliance, for COPA compliance, for all the different states' compliance laws that have suddenly come online, and especially in Europe with the GDPR and others. Realizing that for people to use this new tool, the ancillary things around it are going to become vastly more important. So getting the interfaces in, having the provability, but by that being explainable artificial intelligence is a definite discipline. And if you can potentially be consuming the data that actually was used in training, you can actually do the explainability of what happened, which in some countries and in some areas is a requirement. This here,
Elaborate on that. I don't understand that.
Sure. Explainable artificial intelligence is a discipline that attempts to unwrap the neural network aspect. If you've seen most of your unsupervised or even supervised learning systems, they act as sort of like this network where data goes into a node and it follows an edge to another node, or it may go to hundreds of different nodes from that first node. And it kind of like spiders out and does all kinds of things. And it applies this math that it's technical vectors, and it's sort of like on a gamut of a particular, between two different points at a certain, let's call it height, with a certain weight. But the idea is that the vector is between these two extremes of a particular concept. And at this high, this is the connotation. This is the value of what you're consuming. And these vectors are, as you're doing this, they kind of determine mathematically, oh, if it has these kind of vectors, it should go to this guy. And if it does this, it should do that. So it's unwrapping the data in a way that makes it very difficult to understand, because you didn't define either the ends of that spectrum or the height levels. You didn't define either of those. They were all kind of mathematically determined by constantly rerunning the modeling over and over and over again and feeding that information back. So what ends up happening is that at the end, there is a particular answer per se. There's a particular, as with an LLM, it's predicting the next word of the sentence. It's predicting the next word of this document for you based on all of the other times that this document was written in this way. And it has a flow to it. But understanding why it went from this word to this word, understanding how this happened is helpful, especially when, as you've probably heard numerous times, as they would release these AI as interactive products in the past, almost invariably they would start picking up hate speech. And it's just a surreal aspect to human interactions, how this happens. But the most impactful speech, the one that really jars people, the one that actually engages people, is going to unfortunately be the most engaging of these products. And that's actually going to drive the actual weighting of these things to actually favor these impactful statements, these statements that got the most interaction, that got the most, let's say had the most engagement. So if we talk about what you can do with XAI, is you can actually, and there's a lot of science behind it, but roughly you can kind of be passing metadata as you go and unwrapping it and determining what the impact of those things are. So you understand not only why it's something with the hate speech, where the hate speech came from. So you can then use that to filter your inputs. Again, data sanitization is a huge challenge, especially with large language models, which are ingesting basically the internet. Being able to pick and choose and saying, hey, this content over here, even though it doesn't include any of the negative words, the connotation of it through this system led to a negative outcome. So therefore exclude that content and helps you build new models with better training, better sanitized data. But it also does certain things for compliance. There's lots of laws that explain that if you make a decision about someone, whether it's a fair trade credit, the Fair Credit Reporting Act or others, you have to tell them what information you used to determine that. So if you've ever applied for a credit card and they say, yep, you're good, that's great. But if they say, no, you're bad, they're actually supposed to tell you why. And that telling you why is to actually unwrap how the decision was made. Well, artificial intelligence is supposed to be abiding by that same rule. And obviously it's very difficult if you say vector A was 2 points too high. That doesn't make any sense. So it's not going to be something that people can really grasp. So back around to the original question, I think, um, if you're trying to build a product right now, building things that can help you with the XAI, so you are excluding things you don't want, or potentially making sure that the data that you're ingesting of your database isn't somehow introducing bad data or fundamentally clouding the judgment of this machine. You can use this as a value proposition. I could go to a very large company that is trying to build these systems and say, we manage birthdays. So therefore, if you're over 13, COBA compliance is this, and over 18, it's something else. And we manage this kind of system that would allow me to know that as the data is being re-ingested, as this is being used for training data, if they're under 13, it's excluded completely. If between 13 and 18, we're tokenizing anything that could be identifiable. And like you get all these different features, that would be a huge opportunity for a research firm that's trying to figure out the next two-way system. So if you're Mattel, if you're Kenner, I don't even know if Kenner exists anymore, but if you're one of these larger companies,
Lego.
yeah, exactly. If you're one of these larger companies, having someone who could actually give you this tool that everyone else is able to use, but now you can, and not actually be in danger of non-compliance because of the age 13 rules, that is a huge opportunity. So it might not be another LLM, which people giving away. It could be the things that actually allow a company to use it with confidence and with auditability and compliance built from scratch. Lowering the first bars, if you will, to let people in and get them working. I think but also giving the decision makers the kind of comfort that they need when they're doing their risk mitigation. Are we going to get sued for this? Where is this coming from? Is the government going to fine us? We have this stuff. We have this audit trail. We have these things that allows us to understand where we are and what our actual exposure is. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think that's probably the best explanation of how transformers work that I've ever had. And I've
Sure.
researched it relatively deeply. So, a couple things to unpack there. In terms of how these systems work, we hear about training, we hear about training data, we hear about this kind of black box. And I'm pretty technical, and still I have a lot of unknown and kind of fuzziness as it relates to AI. So, we have a large data set. We set up a GPT to kind of learn off of that data set, and it's building relations, right? Could you say synapses almost, if you will, connecting different pieces to kind of learn what should be associated with what?
So that's a good way of thinking about how the actual weights are applied between those nodes and along these edges. The actual math is a little bit, it's both simpler and more complex, but the idea is that you're not building a synapse, you're deciding whether it fires. And that's the thing that's called an edge. It's the relationship between these nodes. And it includes things like a threshold, whether to fire or not. And it includes things like how to transfer it and what iteration is to pass to the node. You're not passing the entire universe. You only keep passing the parts that it cares about. So there's a domain requirement here. There's lots of pieces that are not super clear when you're just feeding a bunch of text into an ingestion engine, what it's doing. But it's able to get this through an inference engine. It's able to run a process and figure out the next word, figure out the next logical, quote unquote, appropriate word based on a history, based on its understanding of what the question meant, based on its understanding of what an answer that answers that question would have meant. And that's where you're talking about the transform, which is obviously going to have that recursion and stuff like this. That helps it understand as it's moving forward what's already been said and actually kind of developing its own structure as it moves forward. But each time it's doing so, it's looking at the history, it's looking at the original question, it's tokenizing, it's unwrapping this data, and it's attempting in its best way possible to figure out the next logical concept. And again, we associate that with the word, and that's what it is, but it's really trying to string together concepts. And so this is where the power of why that concept is associated is in that XAI aspect, the power of choosing as a company what information you're ingesting. And again, to be honest, most large language models, you as an individual company don't have a large enough data set to make your own LLM. You can ingest your own data and then compare it to other things, or maybe infer what could be said, but your universe of data is going to probably be too small, even with the most advanced algorithms out there. There's not enough behavioral data to actually kind of come back and continually refine that original data to give you the best weights and biases for the actual edges. So, but anyway, I think I'm digressing, and I apologize. The way that I see a small company jumping in and using an LLM or any kind of heuristic modeling system is first understanding what they've got to go a step back and figure out what is the question I'm answering first. And I know that sounds stupid. We all know what it is. Machines don't. Machines don't understand your language, and they're trying to imitate it as best they can, but they don't really understand it. So until you can really understand it, tokenize it, and break it down into its conceptual basis, that's when that thing becomes action. That's when it actually starts to be real. When you ask a question and you begin to get, as they say, daydreams, or just begins to just lie to you, that's oftentimes fundamentally because the direction wasn't clear enough. It wasn't clear on what the actual concrete concepts were that it was attempting to stitch together. So making it concrete, making it simple, allows it to have fewer meandering concepts, meandering options, because the question structure is stronger, and it actually has stronger weights and biases, which actually drives a better choice for the words moving forward on the actual response.
This is fantastic. I mean, I think that your knowledge as relates to AI, you did your undergrad in AI, yes? If not more degrees, did you have more degrees in AI?
I don't, I did, it was in the 90s. So it was a long time ago. I apologize for making everyone feel old, but it was a long time ago. And it was, yes, but it was symbolic logic, especially on the heuristic math.
I think that it's actually really helpful to understand the full spectrum of what's going into AI, and the fact that you have built many startups and software products for publicly traded companies and also early stage startups, and then have also worked on the underlying models, the underlying language, understanding the deep ins and outs of AI. But then you can also zoom out to the practical application. I think it's actually really fascinating to hear how it's kind of stacked layer after layer after layer. Tying it back to startups,
Mm-hmm.
do you think in the world we live in today, AI is almost essential for anything that you build? Or do you think it's just the new shiny thing, and it's a new tool? Yes. It's a new paradigm. Yes. But it's not essential for building new startups.
That's a great question. I believe that the hardest challenge here will be demonstrating that value proposition, that this is going back to that threshold for behavioral change. If this is working well, there'll be a company or a product that's leveraging it extensively, not as selling you AI, but selling you something else, and they will take the lead. When that occurs, then you'll see that this tool is more valuable than the other tools, whether it's human experience or Mechanical Turk, which is what a lot of these companies are doing. There's 1,000 different opportunities to solve the problem. I believe in my heart of hearts that AI is still nascent. It's still kind of coming out of its own shell. And the more people who use it, the more feedback we'll get, and the more opportunity we'll have to leverage it in new and novel ways. I think just making it something that answers a question, it's really, it sounds silly, but it's sort of like a screenwriter. Its job isn't to be honest. Its job is to get you to watch the show. And so if you build a LLM that's designed to engage you, well, the most engaging thing is the thing that piques certain aspects of my interest. It just tickles those little bits inside of your brain. and says, "Hey, isn't this neat? Isn't this fun? Aren't you smart?" Whatever particular aspect is it's attempting to satisfy. AI itself has the capacity to do much more profound things, like when it's used for cancer imaging, where it's actually able to identify things way earlier than human eyes can. To me, that's a much more impactful space. I think if we're using it to do projection and detection of systems, whether it's earthquakes or weather or other systems, I think that is very, very important. When you talk about human behavior, it can also be somewhat of a science and somewhat of a rigid system. But currently, the definition of success for managing people is driven by something that's not yet addressing the humanity aspect. There's a couple people out there. I think one of them is uh, Dr. Joanna Bryson. She is an AI ethicist, and I think she's currently in Germany. Some of her writing is absolutely brilliant. The idea here is that for AI to probably grow effectively, it isn't a matter of slowing it down. It's a matter of actually gearing it to focus in ways that can actually have demonstrable value. If that value currently is how many dollars you get in a startup, it's going to be difficult to move toward this ethics bound AI. I think that until AI has that moment, we're always going to be running on that ragged edge of AI could be super valuable to you or it could light your company on fire. You won't know until it's 5 minutes past happening. Because as with most tools, it's sort of like fire. It keeps you warm, but it can burn down your house. You have to know how to manage fire. You're going to have to learn how to manage this tool of AI. And it has to be not just to make the most money. Again, I'm definitely a capitalist and I believe in using it in a good way, but it's such a new tool and watching people use it, I feel like there's going to be a moment where there's going to be more than one failure here that's going to cause potentially the companies to implode. And I think that that's a danger you have to take when you're using AI in this nascent times. If you are, as I said before, if you're going to offer me as a company this nice Band-Aid solution that drops in front of me and does all the compliance for me and keeps me safe, now I'm way less concerned about that exact situation. I'm way less concerned about, oh my goodness, something goes wrong, because I've done what I'm supposed to do. I've done the necessary pieces to keep my engagement through this, let's call it through this limiting wall, whatever that limiting system is, and whether it's GDPR or other privacy organizations that are telling these algorithms what they can and can't retain. At least if you're doing things the right way, it's going to be up to the people who are legislating. It's going to be up to the people who are managing those things to begin to define the regulations, define the compliance. And as long as you are using a system that makes that transparent to you, you won't care. So do I believe that most people have to worry about it? Probably not, as long as you have someone else who you're leveraging the product through.
I think that's a really unique perspective for two reasons. One, we hear about the AI apocalypse, about AI going rogue, about AGI taking over the world and murdering all humans. And so there has always been, especially in science fiction and popular culture, we've been talking about robots destroying humanity and robot wars and AI wars for generations. But you are framing it as, yes, there is a danger, but the danger is not AGI taking over the world and murdering all of us. It's this is a tool like anything else. And if you're not cautious while using it, if you become over reliant on it, say you build a company on it, you've raised, $100 million and you're $1 billion company and you're backed by this AI. If you don't have good control over that fire, over AI, and you're using it very intentionally, your business could go up in flames. And
Yes.
it could just happen simply due to the model that you're using. You don't fully understand it. Something goes wrong. A big compliance happens. Something catastrophic happens that could be company destroying. And I think that side of AI, that healthy amount of fear with a net new tool that you don't really know how to use and you're just kind of blindly using is a perspective that I haven't heard as much from in terms of being cautious when using AI.
There's a couple of different philosophies around, and they are really true philosophies around motivating an AI to the point where it would actually care enough to do something. Most of them are just trying to, they're carrots and sticks modeling behavior of just get the human to stop asking me a question. Just clear up this thread and move on. Um, the hardest part for me is recognizing that the AI doesn't have a connotation. It doesn't have an intention other than one that it's candid. It literally, the carrots and sticks it's working with are the ones that we're giving it. And no matter what it infers, it always drops down to those carrots and sticks. So if we were to focus primarily on what would be required to make a healthy AI, that would be a philosophical question, not an implementation question. That's why I say, if you really understand your intention, if you're able to break down your questions, your thing you're doing, if you're able to break it down into these very concrete things, you probably won't have to worry so much about inference and daydreaming and all these other things, because you'll be leading the computer to do what it's supposed to do. Find thousands of data points, find its weights, find its biases, find the actual vectors, and give you the right answer, because it's not trying to guess what your question was in the first place.
I really like the image of the AI is just trying to get us to stop asking questions. And I think that that is exactly what it's trying to do. It's trying to give you the answer so that you no longer need to ask questions. And we like to personify, humans love to personify the tools that we use, but the basic premise of AI is to do the thing it's been asked until it is done. And there is not sentience there. There is not even emulation of intelligence. There is answering the question based on the data set that it has and the algorithm that it knows how to predict the next
Yeah,
word or sentence. But that is it.
there may be inference models. There may be things that actually do ask it to not imagine, but statistically determine the likely outcomes of things that it doesn't have in evidence. But again, if you're being very cautious about how you construct your questions, you're very cautious about how you're constructing your models, the exposure to other data points should be minimized, because you're not allowing this other inference to be injected. You're keeping it clean in theory.
If we froze technology today and we allow engineers, entrepreneurs, designers, everyone to catch up to truly leverage just the capabilities that exist right now,
Sure.
what does the technical landscape look like in 5 years? Where do you think software products go? Where do you think user experiences go? Where do you think labor markets go?
So I think that this is very much an inflection point on education. I know that sounds silly, but it's not going to be sufficient to know how to program. You're going to need to understand the logical flows and how software coding that was produced by a machine that may run into other problems. One of the challenges that a couple of these studies have found is that software that's being generated, whether it's by a Microsoft product or others, it's sort of just cobbling it together and making it work, but it doesn't have a cohesive vision for how to manage things like injections or memory management. It doesn't have a cohesive vision. And I think that as engineers, we're often kind of depending on an architect upstream who's going to design how these pieces fit together and making sure that the memory management is correct, or the variable collisions are correct, or all these other things. Maybe we're using a language that helps out in these situations and will throw an error when it compiles. All that's wonderful, but I think that what it's going to do is it's going to elevate most people who were, say, I'm going to use a pejorative, code monkeys, like myself, who people who enjoy writing software. It's going to elevate you into a more architectural mindset. You're going to have to think about things from a holistic structure. You may still need to be driving the boat. And as I said earlier, when you ask the system to build your software, you probably have to say, with greater context, that it does have memory management that is aggressively trying to recover and has a cohesive mapping of variables, and that it's all done in a similar structure and all these pieces, because you understand that while anyone could ask it to build a WordPress clone, that's great. You're going to ask it to do so with better features that are going to actually fulfill those persona needs instead of those perspectives in those roles, so that therefore your product will be a little bit better. The idea that everyone will be able to ask an LLM to build a WordPress clone means that WordPress isn't in danger. The first guy who asks it to build one that actually solves a problem that WordPress isn't, that's the one. So it's not just asking it to build a Me Too product. It's not asking it to build another version of something and hope that maybe you can sell it cheaper and only focus on that. It's going to be more profound than that. And like I said, it's just, you've increased the tool. You used to have servers and software systems and languages and stuff. And now you've gone another tier up. Instead of actually having libraries and commodities, you actually built a system that can stitch things together. But it's going to be up to you as let's call you the arbiter, the person who knows what is true, knows what is correct, the person who's laying down the law and say, this code is sufficient to actually be published, while the language could have done the hard work, done 90% of the work and just throwing it together. It's going to be up to you to actually whittle it down, make it correct, clean it up, sort of become the editor. That means that you can't just be a writer. You've got to have all the skills of the writer and the ability to edit it to make it better. You're going to have to elevate your role a little higher. So I believe that it's an education question. You're going to have to take everyone, what they used to do, and lift them up a little bit higher. They're going to have to be a little bit more capable with this new tool, whether it's technology or content creators.
Yeah. I mean, I think that tracks, especially from a software perspective of people used to write compiler code.
Yeah.
And then you have traditional languages. I don't even know what you would classify them as, but languages. And then we started advancing, and then there's frameworks, which kind of give you a boilerplate of language. And then there are libraries and gems and plugins that you can add on as well. And then there's just kind of increasing layers of, you can stand on the shoulders of all the open source code that has been built before you, so that you're focusing on a much higher layer. And this inflection point takes you one step even higher, where you don't even necessarily need to write the code, or you're writing some, you're modifying it, etc. But there's less code monkeying that is necessary because that higher layer has been installed. And so you need to be able to operate at that level. Given we're able to make that shift now, given that we're now in this paradigm where we can spend more on thinking about value creation, more on the architecture, more on not just spending a lot of time to get to the point where you're able to build the WordPress or the Slack, or kind of replicate and then differentiate on value. What does that mean for software products, and what does that mean for user experience when using software?
So this is going to go right back to that original definition of the threshold for behavioral change. If you're in a defense position, if you already have a market, you've got to make it so that the threshold for behavioral change to sort of leave you is higher. The idea here is that you need to protect that threshold. So you're going to have to continually keep up with everyone else. If you already have, and again, this is the difference between people who have a market versus people who are trying to build a market. If I already exist, this is the reason why Facebook and Google, everyone says it, I just can buy or build my own version of that thing, stack it into my product, and now there's less reason for anyone to leave. Again, now they're equivalent, but they're the devil you know, so why would they leave? So the idea is that you're playing a very different game from an existing product, but you're going to have to be very capable of adjusting to a market that changes dramatically. I think in the next, and this is personal belief, I believe in the next, 5 years, the opportunity for people to make a product that can be profoundly impactful is going to rise. I know that that sounds weird because it's like, oh, there's these very large companies. There is, but you also have that same ability that they had yesterday. You could have the AI build all the other stuff that they offer. You focus on the thing that makes you special. And now when you go to market, the threshold has already been met. They have to react. And it actually puts the larger companies on their heels because they can't just buy to keep up. They're actually competing with someone who has all the other stuff. So AI is going to be the great equalizer, I believe. Going to make it easier for you to compete with these huge leviathans of the industry. You'll be able to get all of the duplicative value and focus on just what you need. Now, do I believe that you should be trying to be everything to everyone? I don't believe that there's a long-term solution to that, but it means that if you're going after a particular silo, that silo is vastly easier to conquer, especially if you're picking one thing inside that silo that you know you can do better. You found the thing, you found the low-hanging fruit, you found the part that they aren't seeing. You can attack it and you can win.
Ultimately, you'll have a greater. Would you say that this is true? Is that when we have this capability for any person can have the same baseline infrastructure that a large corporation has, and you can leverage that through AI, and you can find that one thing that differentiates you and makes you better. Do you think that means that there's a proliferation of more bespoke experiences out there where rather than it being this is Slack, use Slack, it's this is Slack for product managers for companies that are fewer than 10 people and also based in the United States? Do you think that that's kind of the shift that ultimately happens?
I do. I believe that that inside of those individual roles, there's these personas, and you're picking the personas because, as we said before, the toddler has a different behavioral perspective than someone else. You can build the Kraft mac and cheese for toddlers, and you can do that well by having dinosaur shapes. And it can be more expensive because you know what? You don't have to worry about the person purchasing it because they don't count in the situation. You can actually make inroads into something as crazy as the mac and cheese universe, which seems to be kind of like that market's done. No, you can. You could absolutely go after it and you can do the things you want to do if you can find these things that are not being serviced. And because now again, with food market, it's less so, but if you're in software, it could build you all the necessary pieces of the craft universe. You would have all of the necessary other stuff that would be a moat in old terminology. That moat goes away. Now I can get that because it exists and I can see that my product and their product has the same universe. Everything else is the same, except I have dinosaur shapes. Now, if everything's the same, but I have dinosaur shapes, I win and you lose. So I believe that the opportunity for disruption is going to, especially in the software space, is going to accelerate quite a bit.
What is Kirchhoff's principle?
So we mentioned this earlier, but Kerckhoff principle is the idea that, and this is why as an architect, or as a developer, you really need to be paying attention. This information that's in your system, all of its machinations, all of the ways that it works, you should always be assuming that this is known to everyone. So you don't have a moat in the situation. If Google has all kinds of things they call proprietary, but if an AI can remake Google software in an afternoon, which that's an obviously fallacy, but it could probably remake huge chunks of it in a very short period of time. It doesn't matter what they thought was good. It matters what actually is encrypted. So principle is that if the machinations, if the entire definition of how you do your work and what it is, if that was available for you to be secure, you need to make sure that the actual encryption keys that you're using are still held only by you. So I believe that encryption is going to be vastly more important moving forward. I believe that that's one of the reasons why so many federal governments and state governments are legislating that there has to be not backdoors, but ways to be open. And so for you, if you're building right now, your product has very little, the very little moat to protect it from someone else coming in and doing what you do. You have to build something that actually has an intrinsic value that solves a particular problem It's not good enough to just obfuscate or hide what you think is valuable. You have to build it so that it's strong enough that it can withstand people knowing everything about you and still can't compete with you. So Kirchhoff's is mostly about encryption, but it also has a product aspect in that you should always assume that everyone knows everything about your system, just from a data sanitization point.
So if we assume that everything that I'm building is known, is replicable, is out there in the open, and that there's nothing really proprietary, defensible, secret sauce except for what is encrypted, how should that change people's building decisions when building software? I mean, you mentioned that this is more applied to encryption, but if we apply it to startups, business software, what does that actually look like? How does that, how do you build a moat in the moatless society that we live in now?
So I'm going to be a little bit cagey in this one because I'm actually involved in a startup that does something like this right now. But let's just hold off for a second and say, imagine if you have the ability to have a data vault, and a data vault is a system that the actual tokenized information. There's no way for someone to get this other data. You can escalate your privileges, but mostly it's pretty clean. Imagine if instead of having a data vault, there was an enclave somewhere else, and its job was to hold this data in a vault that you can't access. So not only is it functional, but it's opaque to you. If you make a bad hire and someone comes in and tries to steal all of your data, they can't get it because you can't get it. What's happening now is very much like AI, that on the other side of this vault, inside of a black box, there is a proprietary system that's producing a result that then comes out the other side. And because it's on the other side of this wall, and because it's not clear and it's not sitting out where everyone can read it, and it's not, you can't interact with the different edges and nodes, you actually can only get the results of it. To be able to replace this is a vastly larger moat than simply reusing an existing LLM or reusing someone else's product. So we are in the midst of defining and building something that works in a way that's very similar to that. But I don't want to divulge too much. But the idea is that if we build our system correctly with this knowledge of where we're going and why we're going in this direction, we believe that we can provide that kind of value as maybe even a platform for others to use.
Are federated services like Bluesky, and I know Facebook is working on something, Mark Zuckerberg mentioned something on the Lex Friedman podcast, where everything is open in the sense of the platform, but you're bringing your own data, and there is kind of that wall of my data exists on my server that I have, and then you built an application and a software, and then that thing is asking me for my data rather than me giving my data to a Facebook or me giving my data directly to the system. I hold my data, you built the tool, your tool can access it, and I can revoke those permissions at any time. Is that a similar construct, or do you see those as separate ideologies?
So the AT protocol, which is what Bluesky is built on top of, actually stores this in chains, like blockchain. So the idea is that information is it's on a chain, so therefore it's freely available. Other people can't do anything with it. It's yours. And the federation is that which chain is it on, which under what rules, and the authenticated transport of the AT the AT protocol allows certain access to certain pieces. It's sort of like it's a really I love what they're doing with it, and I think that they're doing something special. Our universe is not just authenticated; it's actually encrypted recursively. I don't want to get too deep into it, but imagine if, in a similar vein, as you're traversing through these decisions, as this data in a federated system, as there's something that happens, the impact of that thing can touch thousands of different pieces. But that means that you have to understand how this data impacts this stuff. And that is technically their responsibility, not yours, because it's their universe, their domain. And for me to say, have any say about it is bad. And so a lot of these systems, they put up walls, they try to make it super secure so that the data is secure, and they have the PCI compliance for, the credit card people, and HIPAA compliance and COPA compliance. when you're talking about federation, inside of a federation system, you can actually place the necessary meta tags that would actually allow you to filter out things that was from someone who was under 13, or filter out things that was from a particular region or coming from a different stuff. Your universe, when you federate, you get to pick and choose what aspects of this universe you're accepting in. So not just you hold your data. I, as a server, get to choose what I want your data. And so it's actually more profound. And that's, I believe, to be where the bigger opportunity is. It's going to make political manipulation more difficult, because it's going to be easy to find and use these chains to be able to not just identify who's doing it where, but able to actually put in very advanced kinds of filtering on these servers that are designed to catch and discard manipulation. It's not going to be always blacklisted or this or that other thing. It's just federated services, no. And that's how it is. It's not an argument anymore. It's simply how it works.
So explain Blue Sky and a federated services to my mom, non-technical mother.
Sure. So I appreciate this question. I've had to have this conversation a couple of times. So people are used to Twitter and they understand what Twitter is. In the situation here where, again, currently there's just a one-way flow, but it's going to be a federated system. It's sort of like Twitter, but there's no one person who owns your data. Once it's been presented, it's now available to any server that wants to subscribe to your data. It's yours, and it's yours. And that's why the authenticated transport is that you allow them to have your data and they want your data. So this transaction allows it to be syndicated, allows it to go out to all these different places. So just like my standard mother would do, they make one message that says Happy 4th of July, and they post it on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and every other place. They post it everywhere. It's a lot like that. It's a lot like you have a message that's able to get everywhere. But instead of Twitter can say no and Facebook can say no, and those other systems, no matter what happens, the information that you put out there remains out there. It's actually on the chain and it's indelible. This is important to remember, because when you delete your tweet, it doesn't get deleted from a chain. The fact that that particular transaction has now been overwritten with a blank, that happens, and that's wonderful. But when people are sharing images via direct messages or these other these systems in the AT protocol, and then they delete them later, they're not deleting it. I don't think that they're aware of that yet, that information is actually still present on these chains. But if I'm talking to a mom, I'd say it's a lot like a normal social network, and it behaves in a social network, but you never lose your ownership of the thing. It stays yours forever. Now, by posting it, you've allowed these people to have the information and put it on their sites, and that's fine. But you own the original rights, so you can revoke that. You can say that no, this is still mine, and no one else is allowed to have it, and that's okay. So the authenticated transport is that it's allowed to go from you to other people based on your rules, and they're allowed to replicate it based on their rules.
That's fascinating. So similarly to a Twitter, a Facebook, a Instagram, in that it's a social media platform, that is the Blue Sky part. The unique aspect is, rather than when I write a tweet and that goes onto Twitter servers and then they own that data and they can shut my account off and they can do whatever they want. Even if I delete the tweet from Twitter, it's probably still on their server somewhere. With this, I create my own content. I create my message that I want the world to see. And then I make that publicly available across the world. And then there's certain interfaces that can then display that information. Is that accurate?
Yes. And those interfaces choose. Maybe you harass people in your knitting group, and the knitting server is like, no, we're done with you. We don't want this anymore. They can do that. So it has the federation empowers everyone. The content creator still
except
has
for companies,
control.
Basically, right? In theory, companies have less power.
That's the thing is that I believe that curation is a value that we have forgotten how to see. We don't understand that curation matters. We lack that capacity to understand. I think if a larger company was their job was to take Federated Universe and to distill only the news articles that were worthwhile to read, I would subscribe to that. So someone's putting it out there, and it's up to them to be able to manage this curation. They decide that your mom's needlepoint is fantastic, and they're going to have a separate, like, people who love needlepoint would love to have a place where they can just go in and see other people's needlepoint. It's not just the opportunity to have content that's more or less thrown out to them. It's not scattering seeds. It's much more cultivated. It's much more, this content fits my criteria. And I think that with more AI on this to help you kind of whittle down to things that may be useful, and then on top of that, then applying that curation, applying your sensibility to it, I think that there's great opportunities for companies, content companies, to re-engage in this.
In terms of the application, the actual software that you would build, is it effectively just a different application, but rather than persisting the data on your servers, you're accessing it from a blockchain, and therefore you can do whatever content gating, monetization experience that you want on top of it?
I think that we're getting into some of the details of the AT protocol that's actually still kind of in flight. Hopping onto Bluesky, the good news about this is that the developers of both the AT protocol and of Bluesky itself are actively engaged with it, because they're recognizing that some of these pieces are still a little bit loose and nebulous. So some of the aspects of the storage mechanism and what servers are replicating it and where they're keeping it, a lot of this data is currently going through an iteration. Bluesky, within the next couple of days, I think, is going to actually introduce the ability to have other servers. Until now, it's been just the Bluesky servers using the AT protocol, but within a couple of days, there'll be other servers able to join into this universe and federate that data back and forth. You're still using the AT protocol, but actually communicating between server to server, as well as the user data contained in there. So at that point, a lot of the things which are more currently more theoretical are actually going to become real. And I think that it's going to be easier to see how it functions in about a month.
Interesting to see how technologies continue to stack on one another and build, and blockchain in its next version, more on the content side, seeing how that is iterated on. Shane, in terms of the technical future that you want to see in the world, the technology that you dreamed about as a kid, what are you most excited about? What are you most looking forward to in our technical future?
It's a little bit nerdy, but I believe that a commoditized advisor for individuals is the most important thing I can think of. And I've actually been trying to figure out a way to do this for a while. Every day you look at marketing that has been built and designed, and they've spent a lot of money attempting to sway your perspective. And you have no tools. You don't have any armor. The only armor you have is sort of a general distrust of media and a general distrust of all these things. And I don't think that's good either. People's lack of trust in science and media is challenging for a lot of folks to really wrap their heads around, but it's not coming from nowhere. It's coming because a lot of these systems and services have been leveraged against them. So why would they believe in that stuff now? I believe that some kind of, not Siri, not Alexa, not any of those things, but some kind of assistance that is geared to only have your perspective in mind. I'm talking about content ethics, categorical imperative. You are the only person in their universe. They don't care about anyone else. How does that thing in your corner change your life? Because you're no longer being swayed by scam phone calls or offers to buy certain things. You're going to have someone who actually can give you an honest count. Take it or not, having actual someone in your corner who's an expert beyond human capacity is going to change things. So really commoditizing and making this help giving everyone a Jarvis, giving everyone that thing that does the work so that you can be human. So you're not like trying to do random research on whether deworming gel is going to work on a virus. Like that. Why would a human do that? Well, it's because they've been convinced through 16 other media spaces it isn't valid. If you had some, you could trust it, only in your corner, and had no benefits to anyone else. If that person said, yes, take it, or no, it's for horses, doesn't matter which way it is, you would now have at least some more confidence in how you are navigating the world. Because I think the world has become very confusing for people. And even with people who were very scientific and very capable decision makers up until now, they feel adrift. Give them this bout. Give them the ability to feel like they have control over this universe. That's what I believe is the most important thing.
That's a beautiful future. I hope we get there soon. Shane, if people want to connect with you, follow up with you, where do they find you?
Well, I am currently residing in Philadelphia. Behind me, it's Liberty 2 and Liberty 1. Usually you will find me. I work for a company called the Privacy Company. And obviously it infers a little bit more about that whole encrypted enclave, yada, yada, yada. Until now, we've actually been doing a direct-to-consumer system that was designed to help you remove your data from the internet. So less training data, the better when it comes to that kind of stuff. And you can find me, honestly, any questions you have, you can find me. My name is Shane Brennan. Find me on LinkedIn, connect with me, find me online. I'm available. I love talking with people, especially people who have new and interesting challenges, because it allows me to create a new persona instead of that perspective or discipline, and allows me to really get to understand what's going on. So please feel free to reach out.
Thanks for the conversation, Shane.
Thank you, Elijah.